what I want to start with here is a little bit of a look back on the last year. And to be honest, it's a little surreal looking at this graphic. We put this out in April of 2020 to look at kind of the evolution of the pandemic. And you see that we identified basically four phases, where we had that initial infection phase. We moved to the social distancing phase, which lasted for quite a long time. Now we are in this management and really moving into this eradication phase as we start to increasingly get vaccinated across the world. Although the infection rates still tend to be very high, we are moving, making some progress, at least here in the United States, around the vaccine. And when I think about end user experience management in the context of this, we've seen this entire market around ensuring that the employee has a really great technology experience really change pretty dramatically throughout these different phases. So earlier on, I would say in the social distancing phase, in that first transition to work from home, we saw a lot of these experience management tools being used for basic, work from home setups. Do you have what you need? Do you have the right VPN connections? Do you have consistent access to your cloud applications? That sort of thing. And as we moved through the management phase, we started to see EWM used in new ways, collecting information from users about their overall health and safety, opinions about the workplace, any additional technology needs that maybe were unmet. Around things like collaboration, for instance, tended to be one thing that came up. And so the overall usage of end user experience management has changed very dramatically over the last couple of phases that we've been going through. And we continue to see the evolution of how these tools are used. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I think it's clear if we move to the next slide here around priorities for end user experience management overall, there is a lot of momentum around using better data analytics technologies to improve employee experience. A whopping 64% of folks that we recently surveyed said that they are going to be investing in various data and analytics technologies to improve employee experience at their firms, particularly as technology is really the lifeline for employees in a remote work scenario. This idea that we need to have better understanding of what that experience is like is only getting more and more important. So not all of this is end user experience management. Some of it could be, other elements of data and analytics, could be just survey-based approaches as well. But a lot of it is end user experience management. We're also seeing a huge change around IT organizations and how they approach employee experience, even to the level of being directly gold on improving that tech experience. So just over half of folks said that their technology teams and the individuals on those teams are explicitly gold on providing the right technology to improve EX. So that's a big change. It's not just about the IT metrics anymore. It's about how do you drive that business outcome. A smaller number here, but 29% said they're actually collecting employee feedback to improve tech experience. That number has gone up year over year. Pretty consistently for the past couple of years. This it seems like an obvious thing. You would go and collect feedback around the technology experience. Well, it's not something that's very deeply ingrained in a lot of IT organizations, but we are starting to see that shift. And what's really made this a lot easier is that many of the experience management tools are either, providing a qualitative feedback mechanism, relying on crowdsourcing capabilities. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about crowdsourcing to really provide a little bit more context for that end user. And specifically, the most recent data that we pulled showed that just about a quarter of organizations indicate they're going to invest specifically in end user experience management tools in the next 12 months. That's on top of the already fairly high adoption, which I believe is in the 40 percentile range right now. So there's a lot of movement here amongst technology leaders to really start looking at that technology experience of employees and investing in tools, investing in new processes, et cetera. And so this has evolved quite a bit. If we go to the next slide here, we're seeing a lot of momentum around a couple of key areas of investment for end user experience management. So this is a little bit of a look into the future. Not every tool out there is going to have these capabilities, but definitely things that we're hearing about more consistently from our clients is one, the role of AI and ML-based predictive analysis, right? Getting away from being super reactive to issues happening in a technology environment, and instead being able to look at various signals that are happening and be able to start predicting some of those outages and disruptions that are occurring. That's a lot of the direction that this industry is going in. And there's some early success with across the industry, but this is still an area that is still developing. Broader employee engagement analysis. So one of the major strengths today in this space is around the telemetry collection, the actual data itself. We'll talk a little bit later about, looking specifically at SaaS applications and collecting that data and tracing that to outages and so forth. But one of the other areas that we are hearing about is, what about the behavior of the end user? How do I start to measure things like adoption from the end user perspective, or looking at how they're using various technology tools? And that is that an indicator of satisfaction with that piece of technology? Are there areas that we could improve that? And so beginning to look more around the behavior of the user continues to be a trend that we are seeing out there today. True root cause analysis, understanding why a problem is happening. A lot of the solutions today will tell you where a problem is happening, but they won't tell you why it's happening. And so this idea of true root cause analysis, of being able to trace this from the endpoint through the application, through the ISP, all the way back to the cloud provider, and we'll show kind of a linear chain later on that kind of goes in depth on that, I think is a major area of investment for many of the vendors in this space, and a key criteria that you need if you really want to understand the key things that are holding back employee productivity in your organization from a tech perspective. Remote work experience monitoring, of course, we're going to see more and more of this. We saw a lot of things around VPN, home network diagnostics, things of that nature. I expect that we'll continue to see more targeted capabilities for looking at the remote work experience as well. This is a big topic of our discussion today, but the combination of both synthetic testing and real user monitoring capabilities, right? And we'll go into the difference between those two and why you need both of them. But a lot of the trend is toward real user monitoring and understanding what is that user actually experiencing in this moment in time. And how can we go and fix that for them as quickly as possible? So the combination of those two things is increasingly something we hear about from our clients, which, by the way, tend to be Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. So these are larger enterprises that are looking at this. Although I do think that experience management it plays a role in basically every size of company, SMB down to the very smallest organizations as well. And increased support for mobile and LTE connectivity, especially as we move towards more of a hybrid workplace. I have some numbers I'll share on that as well, just later on in the webinar. But this is basically what I'm seeing in the overall space of end user experience management. Jason, I'm curious, in your perspective, what are you seeing in this with regard to this question?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. In working with customers and companies and prospects prior to 2020, prior to the pandemic, the COVID times, and then into 2020, we just saw that there was an acceleration of all of these digital transformations. Some of this, a lot of this stuff was ongoing already. But then when the pandemic hit and users moved to work from home and to work anywhere, all of these transformations just accelerated. IT was already shedding on-premise infrastructure. They were getting rid of Exchange servers and SharePoint servers and file servers, and they were rapidly adopting Office 365. And they were, the customers and IT and the users, the business units, were looking to shift to SaaS. They wanted the ability to upgrade things quicker. They wanted new tools, new applications faster. A little bit of it goes back to the sort of consumerization of IT. Everybody was getting better equipment at home, and they wanted to be able to get to these new things as fast as possible. So that forced the adoption of, SaaS tools, modern workplace technologies. And then once people moved home fully, for the hybrid work and the increased use of collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams, that accelerated the shift and the digital transformations, whether it's cloud proxies or SD-WANs or VPNs. So a lot of, there was just a huge shift, a rapid shift for IT, that got accelerated in 2020. And on the next slide, you can see that, this cuts across all of the different personas that, that IT, has, and that everybody that was involved in sort of managing these digital transformation shifts for their end users, whether it's, application and service owners, the guys that decided to go to the cloud, the guys that decided to go to Office 365, they needed to understand how it was working for their end users, whether they were, whether they were at HQ, at the headquarters, or at home. The help desk needed to understand, and be able to remotely troubleshoot, as you mentioned before. The network administrators got, maybe blamed for, poor VPN or proxy infrastructure. And the network administrators might have said, no, it's not us. It's the service providers, or ISPs, or the cloud providers that are having problems. The NOC and the operations personas, those teams, they needed to be aware in real time and ahead of time as to whether or not there were outages with respect to collaboration tools, file serving, sharing, SharePoint. They needed to understand how their end users were dealing with this remote work and being able to collaborate sufficiently now that everything had changed in 2020. And then also, VDI has taken off, and remotely serving IT assets and IT applications from virtual desktops that are in the cloud. Being able to test and make sure that those are operating well from people's home networks, from people's VPNs, through all kinds of different technologies, became more and more critical in 2020, and will continue to as people try to work anywhere.